I remember the first time I stepped into that place, the nursing home on the outskirts of town. It was one of those places that seemed to blend into the background of everyday life, unnoticed by most, except for those who had family or friends residing within its walls. The building itself was unremarkable, a nondescript two-story structure with faded paint and overgrown shrubbery. But as I crossed the threshold, I felt a chill crawl up my spine, a sense of unease settling in the pit of my stomach. My name is David, and I've been a nurse for over a decade now. I've seen my fair share of suffering and sorrow, but there was something different about this place. It wasn't just the aging facade or the smell of antiseptic that hung heavy in the air. It was the silence. A suffocating silence that seemed to permeate every corner of the building, broken only by the occasional cough or shuffle of footsteps. As I made my rounds that first day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that unseen eyes followed my every move. The residents, too, seemed to sense it, their eyes hollow and vacant, their voices nothing more than whispers carried on the wind. But it wasn't until night fell and the halls emptied that I truly felt the weight of the silence pressing down on me. My days began to settle into a routine. I'd arrive at the nursing home early in the morning, ready to attend to the residents' needs. There were medications to distribute, meals to serve, and endless rounds to complete. It was exhausting, but rewarding work. Yet, for my very first week, there was something, or rather, someone, that stood out. He was a tall man, probably in his mid-50s, with a gaunt face and sharp, piercing eyes. He came every day, without fail, to visit his mother, Mrs. Johnson. At first, I thought it was a sweet gesture. It was rare for residents to have family members visit so frequently. Most of the elderly in the nursing home were left to live out their days in solitude, forgotten by their families. I noticed him sitting by his mother's bedside, holding her hand, speaking to her in hushed tones. Mrs. Johnson was a quiet woman, suffering from advanced dementia. She rarely spoke, and when she did, it was often in fragmented sentences that made little sense. Her son's visits seemed to bring a flicker of recognition to her eyes, though, and I admired his dedication. However, as the weeks passed, I began to notice something peculiar. His visits, though ostensibly for his mother, seemed to be more about observing me. I often felt his eyes on me as I worked. At first I brushed it off as paranoia, a trick of my overworked mind. But it became undeniable. He watched me intently, his gaze following me as I moved from room to room. It wasn't just his eyes. He began to find reasons to speak to me, to ask questions about his mother's care, her medications, and the routine of the nursing home. While these were valid concerns, there was an intensity to his inquiries that made me uncomfortable. He seemed less interested in the answers, and more in prolonging our conversations. One evening, I mentioned my unease to a colleague, Louisa. She was an experienced nurse and had worked there for several years. I told her about the man, and how his attention seemed to be focused on me rather than his mother. Louisa listened carefully, her brow furrowed with concern. She agreed that it was strange and suggested we keep an eye on him. With Louisa's support, I felt a little better. We began to monitor his visits more closely, and a pattern emerged quickly. He only stayed on the days I was working. If I wasn't there, he would leave within minutes. It was unsettling, but there wasn't much we could do. He hadn't done anything overtly wrong. He was just always there. One evening, after a long shift, I was walking to my car in the dimly lit parking lot. The air was cool, and the sky was a deep shade of blue, the last light of day fading into night. As I approached my car, I saw him. He was sitting in his own car, parked a few rows away, watching me. My heart pounded in my chest. I pretended not to see him and fumbled for my phone, pretending to receive a call. I hurried to my car, got in, and locked the doors. As soon as I got into the car, I saw a photograph on the seat next to mine. I was horrified. It was a picture of a man, very similar to me, but with the eyes scratched out. It looked as if someone had scribbled over them until that part of the paper was torn away. I was completely frozen. Had he been inside my car? With some relief, I noticed that I had left the window on that door slightly open. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to slip the photograph through. Even so, the panic in me was already set. Was it a threat? I got out of there as fast as I could. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. He was still sitting there, his car engine idling, his eyes fixed on me, smiling and trying to gauge my expression and reaction to that photograph. Clearly left there by him. I didn't breathe easy until I was miles away, convinced I had lost him. That night, I made my first call to the police. I don't think I've ever felt so disrespected. On the other end of the line, they completely dismissed what I was saying. They almost implied that I wasn't man enough to be scared of the situation. They only took me a little more seriously when I lost my temper and demanded to speak with another officer. This time, the officer was much more understanding and sensitive to my situation. He said they would investigate the man, but warned that since there hadn't been a direct threat, there wasn't much they could do. But at least they took note and made a record of it. The next day, I reported the incident to my boss. I explained how this man had been making me uncomfortable, how he seemed to be watching me, following me. He listened, but there was little he could do. He reminded me that we couldn't tell him to stop visiting his mother, and that the nursing home couldn't afford to lose any more residents due to past financial troubles. He advised me to keep my distance and report any further concerns. His words were little comfort. I felt trapped, powerless to change my situation. The man continued his visits, his eyes always on me, his presence a constant source of anxiety. I tried to avoid him, to keep my interactions brief, but it was difficult. He was persistent. After several more weeks of this, I reached my breaking point. I told my boss that either he transferred me to a different wing, or I would resign and file a formal complaint against the facility for not protecting its staff. He agreed to transfer me, asking me to remain calm and professional. The transfer was a relief, at least initially. For the first few days, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The man's visits continued, but he stayed away from me, confined to his mother's room in the other wing. I began to hope that things would settle down, that I could go back to doing my job without the constant fear of being watched. But my relief was short-lived. One evening, as I was leaving the nursing home, I saw him again. He was sitting in his car, parked just outside the entrance, watching me. My heart sank. It seemed that no matter what I did, I couldn't escape him. I drove home that night with a growing sense of despair. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw a car in my rearview mirror, following me from a distance. I recognized it immediately. It was him. Panic surged through me. I couldn't let him find out where I lived. I drove past my house, continuing down the road. I didn't have a plan, but I knew I couldn't stop. I drove for hours, taking random turns, trying to lose him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I looked back and saw nothing but an empty road behind me. He was gone. That night, I checked into a hotel and called my lawyer. I explained everything that had happened and asked him to prepare my resignation. I also called the police and filed a report. Lastly, I called my boss and told him I was done. My lawyer would handle the paperwork, but I wouldn't be returning to work. In the days that followed, I stayed at the hotel, too afraid to go home. I didn't have a clear plan for what to do next, but I knew I couldn't continue working at that nursing home. The fear of what that man might do if he found out where I lived was too great. 2 months have passed since then. I'm still in the same town, but my life has changed drastically. I now work at a local clinic, keeping my interactions with patients and their families strictly professional. My days are a blur of work and home, with little in between. I rarely go out in public. I do my grocery shopping at odd hours, avoiding places where I might run into him. It's a small town, and the thought of seeing him again fills me with panic. I've become hyper-vigilant, constantly looking over my shoulder, my heart racing at the slightest sound. Every night, I double-check the locks on my doors and windows. I've installed security cameras around my apartment, monitoring every angle. Despite all these precautions, I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, watching, waiting. My savings are slowly dwindling, and I know I'll need to move again soon. I've been looking for jobs in other towns, hoping to find a place where I can start fresh, far away from the memories of that nursing home and the man who haunted my days and nights for months. Living like this, in constant fear, is exhausting. I never imagined my life would take such a turn. I miss the days when I could walk down the street without glancing over my shoulder, when I could enjoy a quiet evening at home without jumping at every creak and rustle. But for now, this is my reality. I take it one day at a time, hoping that someday I'll be able to live without fear again. Until then, I keep my head down, stay vigilant, and pray that he never finds me. Moving into a house near the university seemed like the ideal choice. I was in my final year of college, the most challenging and demanding of all. I needed a place close by to save time and money. I found a house shared with two other guys, Lucas and John. It wasn't the prettiest house, but it was functional and, most importantly, cheap. That was all I needed. Saving money allowed me to focus on my studies without worrying so much about expenses. Lucas and John were friendly. We had different schedules, which was great because I planned to spend most of my time at the university and in the library, studying. The plan was simple: go to classes, study in the library, and come home just to sleep. It seemed like the perfect plan for someone introverted like me. In the first few days, everything went as expected. I would come home late, take a shower, have a quick dinner, and go to bed. However, after a few days, I started noticing small things out of place in my room. Nothing too alarming, but enough to make me uneasy. Things like books moved, pens out of the case, the bed slightly undone. Initially, I didn't pay much attention, attributing these small changes to my fatigue. One night, when I got home, I noticed something that really worried me. One of my pairs of underwear was missing. It was a specific pair, one that I really liked. It was something I would definitely notice if it was out of place. At first, I thought I might have lost it in the laundry, but something didn't feel right. I decided to ask my housemates if any of them had been in my room. Both denied it. Lucas and John didn't even have the key to my room. Doubt began to gnaw at me. How could someone be messing with my things without leaving any trace? I resolved to set up a small trap. I used a thin thread on the door of my room. I would place it discreetly when I left and remove it when I returned. If someone entered, the thread would fall without the person noticing. Days passed, and the thread was never touched, but things continued to be out of place. That's when I considered the balcony for the first time. My room had a small balcony that was continuous with the next house, separated only by a small wall easily overcome. I had never thought about the neighbor until then. I talked to Lucas and John about the neighbor. They barely knew him. They only knew that he was an older man who rarely made noise and almost never left his house. That information didn't make me feel any better. One night, while changing clothes, I heard a slight noise. It was almost imperceptible, but enough to alert me. That's when I noticed something strange about the painting on the wall. One of the eyes of the man in the painting looked different. One was completely black, while the other was a normal, painted eye. I approached the painting with my heart racing. I lifted it and discovered a hole in the wall, going through to the neighbor's house. How had I not noticed that before? Had the neighbor been watching me all those days? Terrified, I immediately called the police and explained what I had found. They arrived quickly and started investigating. When they entered the neighbor's house, the reality was far worse than I could have imagined. The man was a predator who had been accused 3 times before of stalking young men my age. In his house, they found several photographs of me and small personal objects. There were also countless other photographs of other young men. It was horrifying to think about how long he might have been doing this. There were photographs of me changing clothes, and most terrifying of all, photographs of me taken while I was sleeping. Close-up photographs. That man had been in my room during the night. Just the thought of it left me chilled. I went back to my parents' house the next day. The experience left me deeply shaken. The sense of security I felt in my own home had been destroyed. Since then, I've never stayed anywhere without thoroughly inspecting every corner.